From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views, and today's discussion is around unclaimed property. Unclaimed property may be an area that's less familiar to our audience, so we're thrilled today to have two senior managers from Deloitte's unclaimed property tax business. We're being joined today by Lauren McGuire. Lauren is a senior manager with over 10 years of unclaimed property experience, as well as Tara Mastroserio. Tara is also a senior manager with 18 years of unclaimed property experience. And she has been both on the client service side as well as the audit side. So lots of great experience there. Lauren, I'm going to start with you. Give us some basics. What is unclaimed property and why should companies pay attention to it?
Thank you, Carrie. So unclaimed property, for folks that don't know, is any unresolved obligation that's generated in the course of a company's business operations that are owed to a third party. The company would be considered the holder of the property, and the third party is considered the owner. And companies have a responsibility to report these obligations to a jurisdiction if they can't get in contact with the owner after a certain period of time. And the period of time we call in the unclaimed property world the dormancy period. Now, the dormancy period varies by property type and state. So, for example, payroll is usually a 1 or 3 year dormancy. Accounts payable and accounts receivable is 3 or 5 years. Now, there's 55 jurisdictions in the United States that have unclaimed property laws, and all U.S. domiciled companies have reporting obligations. So it's important to note that a bunch of states even require negative filings. So even if a company has nothing to report in a certain state, they can still have an unclaimed property filing obligation. And all companies do, whether it's an LLC, a partnership, not-for-profit, all companies have filing obligations. And just a fun fact about unclaimed property, it's one of the biggest sources of revenue for the states. It's currently estimated that the states are holding about $80 billion in unclaimed funds, and that 1 in 7 people may have unclaimed property that the states are holding. So really interesting.
So that is interesting. And so it's not a tax per se, but because it's a regulatory matter, it ends up being handled by tax in a lot of instances. Is that right, Lauren?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, got it. Tara, let me turn to you. So what are some of the hot topics in the unclaimed property space? I know I've been hearing about some new voluntary compliance programs. Can you give us some of that background and what the buzz is in the marketplace?
Absolutely. California's amnesty program is really big news in the unclaimed property world. It's really exciting for those of us who are in the industry. On September 13, 2022, California signed into law an unclaimed property voluntary compliance program for the first time in over 20 years. This program will allow the waiver of the 12% per annum interest rate that has historically been automatically levied on past due property, with a waiver rarely being offered. However, in order to be eligible to apply for this voluntary compliance program, they must not have been under audit or receive notice of an audit by California or by a third-party audit on behalf of California, subject to a civil or criminal prosecution involving unclaimed property compliance, and in possession of an unpaid interest notice within the last 5 years, or have successfully argued for an interest waiver in the 5 years preceding their application to the program. So it's important before a company apply, they make sure that they meet the requirements. Additionally, a few things to note for a company wanting to join the program. The VCP lookback period is a minimum of 10 years. However, it's the state's expectation that a company review all periods of available books and records. So if a company has 12 years worth of books and records, they should go back 12 years. They'll be required to complete a mandatory training program within 3 months of being accepted to the program. Due diligence letters need to be issued no less than 30 days prior to submitting a company's preliminary holder notice report. And the preliminary holder notice report is due within 6 months after the notice of acceptance into the voluntary compliance by the state. Further, the final holder report remit and payment is due 7 months and 15 days from the filing of the preliminary holder notice report. The state has reiterated that the program is meant to be holder-friendly, and they will work with companies on the timelines to ensure that holders, especially first-time filers, are successfully able to complete the program. It should be noted, though, that entering into the program and completing the voluntary compliance program does not waive the right for the state to conduct an audit of the periods reviewed under the program. If the state discovers property that should have been reported, they can assess interest on all the property reported under the voluntary compliance program. So it's extremely important that a company joining the program thoroughly reviews its books and records to uncover any and all unclaimed property prior to joining.
Well, it sounds like for companies that have had exposure in California, this is a great opportunity for them to clean that up. Lauren, maybe I'll turn to you. Are there other VDA programs that are a hot topic now?
Yes, Delaware. Delaware has always been a pretty active state in the unclaimed property world. So they've always had a pretty robust VDA program. Their look back period is currently 10 report years, which is 10 years, plus their dormancy period, which is 5 years. So a total of 15 years look back. Now, most companies don't have records going 15 years back. So what Delaware does is they look at the records that the company does have available, and they derive an error ratio and then estimate or quantify back by multiplying that error ratio by either revenue or operating expenses, depending on the property type, for years where the records are not available. So the estimation can be pretty substantial, and then companies won't typically have this estimation reserved on their books unless they did some type of diagnostic review to determine what their potential exposure could be and then reserve for it. So it's a hit to their P&L, and it could be a pretty big hit. Now, over the past few years, Delaware started a new mailing process for their voluntary disclosure agreement program, where twice a year, letters are sent to companies inviting them to enroll in the program. So the letters were sent out this year in February 2023 from the Secretary of State's office, and then the last round of mailings this year is going to be sent out in July. They're sent to the CFO and registered agent, so sometimes they'll open it up, they'll think it's junk mail, and they throw it away. However, on the letter, it says that the company has 90 days to respond from the date of the letter. So if they don't respond, they will receive an audit notice. And these audit notices are typically sent out pretty quickly after the deadline passes. So that's why it's really important for companies to pay attention if they receive these letters. We've also heard companies try to tell Delaware that they never received it, but the state does send them via certified mail. So they do have proof it was delivered, and they won't really accept that as an answer. So again, maybe it just got routed to the wrong person within the company, or maybe it was thrown away. Someone thought it was spam or junk mail. So we would just tell companies, be on the lookout for those letters. Don't miss the deadline to respond.
That is a short notice period. And I can imagine it takes a while to get it routed to the right department. So great advice there. Terry, you talked a little bit about companies being selected for audit. Can you talk about why states are becoming more aggressive, and tell us a little bit more about what's included in one of these audits?
Sure. Over the last few years, with the state's increasing capability of determining companies that are potentially out of compliance, utilizing data mining techniques, they have been successfully able to target non-compliant companies in a more streamlined and budget-friendly fashion. In addition to the state's own ability to select companies for audit, the growing number of audit vendors that the states can rely on determine potential targets, as well as actually conducting the audit, has created an uptick in the amount of audits being conducted in both companies that have been filing and those that have not. These third-party audit vendors are paid on a contingency basis. Therefore, it does not cost the state anything to engage with them. Historically, states have had budget constraints limiting the number of audits it could conduct, but hiring outside vendors takes away the resource burden. States and companies alike in a downward economy have budget and resource constraints, but with this being alleviated for the states, it leaves companies with limited resources and vulnerable. In addition to the traditional unclaimed property audit that can take many years to complete with exhaustive data and information requests, many states have recently been conducting single state self-audits. These audits are in a questionnaire format where the company under audit is asked to complete on its own to identify areas where unremitted unclaimed property potentially exists. This allows the states to send thousands of companies audit questionnaires with very little effort, driving unclaimed property remittances and further annual compliance. Completing a self-audit, however, does not preclude the state from selecting the company for an audit, so it's important for a company to examine its books and records thoroughly. Whether a company is in compliance or not, regardless of industry, should periodically proactively review their compliance process so they can avail themselves of opportunities to remediate any unidentified exposures through VDAs or process improvements.
Well, that's interesting. So it sounds like there are many ways that companies could be drawn into these audits and that companies should be concerned about complying with unclaimed property. So if you have one piece of advice you could offer to our audience, what would that be? And maybe both of you feel free to chime in here.
Sure. Companies should stay vigilant from both a standpoint of state outreach as well as proactively. Unclaimed property spans many departments of an organization. It's important for a company to develop policies and procedures and ensure they are being implemented across the entire organization to mitigate risk. Unclaimed property generally doesn't have one tried and true place in an organization, so it's important to understand how it is being handled and what department is essentially owning it. Unclaimed property can be complex, and the laws are ever changing. So if you are unsure if your organization is handling it properly, you should reach out to a trusted advisor.
And I would probably say one piece of advice I would give is to stay on top of acquisitions. Sometimes companies will complete a VDA or an audit and think they're done. They don't have to think about unclaimed property anymore. Maybe they just do ongoing compliance on a go-forward basis, but they may not think about the companies they're acquiring over the years. So they may be inheriting years' worth of exposure in a stock acquisition. So it's very important to just do a review of the acquired company to see what exactly it is they're inheriting. Sometimes with acquisitions as well, there can be employee turnover, system conversions, and things of that nature. So the company can lose all of that historical knowledge.
That's really helpful advice. Thank you, Lauren and Tara, for that overview. Lots for companies to consider, especially with new programs coming out. Very timely advice. So if our audience would like more information, you could connect with Lauren and Tara directly via LinkedIn. You can also go to Deloitte.com and search unclaimed property, and you'll see some resources there. We also hope you continue to listen in to these webcasts in the future. So thank you, audience, for listening in. We hope you all continue to be well. Take care, everyone.